So good morning to our class of Proof of Heaven, and it is class 4. So this is class 4, and then next week is our last one. So we're going to attempt to try to wrap it up next week, which we'll see if I can do that. So welcome to everybody who is on and all of those who are watching us online as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pin myself. There we go. Good. So we are going to cover a section of the book today, but I do need to start with something else, and it's because my heart is heavy. I watched the news this morning, and if you all have been on news, you've seen what happened in Atlanta. And I had gotten used to the country not having any sort of mass shootings, and I'm now back into the melancholy side of that. And to make matters a little worse, if you will, I'm from Washington State, and we have a large percentage of Washingtonians are of Asian descent, and it very much appears that this was racially motivated. We are still trying to wrestle with the events of 2020, and then to have this on top. So we learned in Washington State history that we have some very large Chinatowns, and that's because the railroads ended up in Washington, and that's where they ended. And the Chinese people were laid off and had to find a way to live. We also, in Washington, we have a large Japanese population. When I was working for Safeco, which is the insurance company, one of my insurance agents, when he was 7 years old, and he was in an internment camp after Pearl Harbor. And the internment camp is at a fairgrounds that are in between Tacoma and Seattle. And so he spent a small portion of his childhood there. And his kids have gone to Stanford, and he's done very well. He was a very successful insurance agent, but he never lost sight of the fact that he was interned because of his family's background. Also, at the insurance company at the time, we were, I think, the 5th, 6th, something like that, largest insurance company in the country, using independent insurance agents. And I brought on the first Vietnamese insurance agent. So if you let that sink in, Safeco had been around since 1927. Again, one of the largest insurance companies in the country. And if you add in that we used only independent agents, that would make us even bigger. And we had no Vietnamese agents. So when the marketing team and I went to go meet with our newest agent, he said, so here's the deal. My insureds, their parents were here and only could ride bikes. My insureds are driving Toyotas. Their kids are going to be driving Lexuses. Why is it that your insurance company has suddenly decided we're important? Is it because our kids are now driving Lexuses? And the marketing team was kind of scrambling, and I just looked at him. Yes. That's it. I mean, they're buying houses, they're buying nice cars. Now we're interested. And I'm sorry that it's wrong. It's not easy being Vietnamese in America, but we're going to start reversing that. And so this hits to me closely. Some good friends, of course, in college. One of them, Jan, her dad was a Marine in Vietnam, and her mom was a woman in Vietnam, and they fell in love, got married. And I mean, it's just a part of Washington State fabric. And so it's hard. Gary Locke was one of our first Asian American governors in the country. And then in Chula Vista, just north of us, is National City. National City has the largest Filipino population in the country. They like to say in the world. And they elected their first Filipino representative to the House of Representatives 10 years ago. It took that long to get a Filipino elected to the House of Congress. So, it's I'm just having difficulty with this. So as we wrestle with consciousness and who God is, and as we wrestle with heaven and all the rest of this, just know your priest has a heavy heart this morning. And so I'm thinking of all my friends and people in professional businesses that are fearful, and my insurance agent who lived through the internment. I just can't imagine what's happening and going through his mind. So with that, I would like to open this in prayer, and I'm going to read one, and it's from, if you want to look at it later, it's from page 100 in the Book of Common Prayer. So let us pray. O God, you have made of one blood all the peoples of the earth, and sent your blessed Son to preach peace to those who are far off and to those who are near. Grant that people everywhere may seek after you and find you. Bring the nations into your fold. Pour out your Spirit upon all flesh, and hasten the coming of your kingdom. And Lord, we pray for all who are fearful today. We pray especially for those who mourn. We pray for those who have died. Bring peace to our nation. We pray this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
David, may I add to that too, the wonderful Wu family who are part of our congregation for so many years.
Yeah. Yeah, his picture is right over there. So I have him here. Yeah, and with his family, we have talked about race and the church. So it's yeah. So why not just start with a dose of reality? And my reflection this past week, and it was about God, the handrail. And so our author, Alexander, Dr. Alexander, is talking to us about a view and vision of God and free will. And we're going to go into that. And but that we have free will and evil exists. And so we certainly have been reminded again of these things. And God as handrail is the God who doesn't step in to stop these things, but the God who supports us and guides us. And I know that God abhors this action and behavior as well. He created us all. I'm sorry, I said I was going to refer to God in the when it was just men online this morning. I said I'm going to refer to God only as female today. So why not? That we are made in her image, and that she loves all that she creates. And so these type of shootings and violence, and this is not the only violence that's happened this year against people of Asian descent, that it's just going exactly against God's will. And so I just needed to call that sin out and to say that it's present, and that at least that we are, although I feel helpless in fixing it, I need to address it and say that it's there. So, all right. Any thoughts before we jump in? All right. Well, with that, you all look like you're contemplating, and I don't want to jump right into what we're doing and not give you time to talk. So Rick, I'm going to pick on you because you're mute. Oh wait, Diane, yes?
I'll say something. I have 7 grandchildren, and they're all flavors, and I have 3 that are half Filipino. And even though we're in a rural area, and I just sort of forget that they're Filipino or that they're slightly darker than others in this area. But the discrimination isn't quite as bad, of course, in a small area where there are not great groups of say, Chinese and so forth, but it's there. I mean, it's subtle, but it's there. And I tend to forget, and then all of a sudden something will come up with one of the kids, and they're very lovely, respectable, actually. Their mother has done a fine job of that as far as older folks and just about everybody. So, but I do see it, and but I forget about it most of the time. I forget that it's there, and then every once in a while, I see somebody that's kind of looking askance, like you really have all these dark people, but I mean, one of them's completing his master's in economics, and another one's in a nurse practitioner, and you're right, they may be driving Lexuses in the future. So, but it's not as bad as it would be on the West Coast, I don't think, because you have great blocks of Filipinos and Chinese and so forth. And that may be scary for some people. I don't know that what their motivation is, but it's truly awful.
Right, it is. Yeah, yeah.
So I will be quiet, and then we'll go on.
Right, right. There's a part of, I grew up in Tacoma, and there's a section of Tacoma that's Korean. And it is a little, I don't know, shocking is the right word, but when you drive down, the main drive, which is 2 lanes each way in a center line, and then you see signs in a foreign language. And of course, the Asian languages are interesting, and so that can be a bit shocking, but it's also America. I mean, this is who we are. So, and as my Filipino friends would say, the Navy would sink without Filipinos. Like, they may not sink. It certainly wouldn't leave dock, though, right? And one of my parishioners is saying,
profession too. The medical profession
Amen.
too.
Absolutely.
And highly, a lot of Filipino nurses.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I will add that 2 of my grandchildren are part Native American and part Chinese.
Oh, wow.
Know that by looking at them. And I think that is really cool. And I think about America being the melting pot, and but that was a melting pot for Western Europeans primarily. And now we're the melting pot on much more of a global configuration. And I'll choose my words carefully. I think the attack on the Asians represents the terror of what has been the ruling class, and that is the only unprotected class in the US is the white male. And white males have been in charge for some time, and they're losing their grip and circling their wagons and getting desperate. And I think my point of view is that events such as the shooting this morning and is a reflection of that, and that white supremacist mentality.
Yeah. We have several problems in the country, and that's one of them, a huge one. Huge.
Number one is a pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is the cause of this, I think.
Right. And incorrectly blaming people of Asian descent for bringing it. So yeah. Yeah. So with the Brazilian strain that Rick is concerned about of COVID-19, are we then going to see hate crimes against Brazilians? I mean, it's, I don't know. So back to your thought, John, about the melting pot. In political science realms, we are talking about, we may have been a melting pot at one point. We are now a mixed salad. And that we're all mixed in together, and that our Constitution is the salad dressing. It's what's holding us, it's what's pulling us together. It's what makes the salad a salad instead of just a bunch of loose, organized things. And it's messy and disorganized. And the cucumbers will clump up over here and the tomatoes will clump up over there, but you got to keep mixing it. And so anyway, we have 2 Canadians, and so I only have the American perspective. How are things going in Canada? Are you seeing similar? And no, know that one of my roommates in college, he's from Hong Kong, and so we would go to his house in Vancouver, British Columbia, and he said it's called Hongcouver, I think is because it's Hong Kong. But so his parents were both very successful. His mom owned a bowling alley, and his dad is a medical doctor. And so he drove the family's 30-year-old Mercedes sedan to college. And he believes that he gets followed by the police because they see a young Asian driving a Mercedes, and they don't realize that it's old. And so he and I would have conversations about that and how it's a little safer when I'm in the car with him when he's in America. And so that was my first introduction to that. So any thoughts, Larry or Sue?
May I answer first, coming from Toronto, a very,
Sure.
very cosmopolitan city.
Right.
They all first call it Little Italy, had the largest, I think, Italian population. We're going back into the 60s. Out of Italy, I mean, there's Chinatown, there is everything. I don't think there's a horrible discrimination, except now amongst the gangsters.
Mhm.
And as far as the Chinese go, yes, they're hugely involved in racketeering, money laundering, along with the Italian mafia. There's a huge Chinese mafia there. And I don't even know if I've never had, some of my best friends are Chinese, all nationalities. But until just recently, I think it's the young people who are involved with drugs and guns and led by certain ethnic groups. So that's where the problem begins. And I don't know how the police are handling it. It's become increasingly difficult. But growing up, or not being in Toronto since, I guess, 19, there's never been, I don't think, a tremendous discrimination. We just accepted everyone. It took a little while there were communities where people lived, whether you're Portuguese, Chinese, Italian, but the world has changed. So I just looked up and they said the last Chinese shooting was in downtown Toronto, was 2012, I think it said. That was one. There's nothing just recently. I just Googled as we were talking. But that doesn't mean it's not going to start tomorrow.
Right.
So,
Right.
Larry, I don't know what it's like down in Nova Scotia, because you have a lot of ethnic groups too with the shipping and.
Well, Canada is a microcosm of the United States. We're not free of any of the issues that you folks suffer and enjoy. My roommate in my first year, can you hear me?
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My roommate in my first year at the Royal Military College was a young Japanese lad who had spent several years in an internment camp in Hope, BC, not far from Seattle, David, in Hope. His dad had a fishing industry on the West Coast. I think he had a fleet of 2 or 3 large fishing boats, which he never recovered after the war. There were claims, and there was an attempt to remunerate the folks, but he carried he carried a burden on his shoulders because he was a proud Canadian, as his brothers, his parents, and they were treated very shabbily. Are there vestiges of that today? I think there's a shame in Canada about that and others. We turned away a lot of Jewish people who had survived in Europe and came to Canada. This is back now in the pre-Second World War, but we turned them away. Why would we have done that, given the plight of these people? I mean, you name the issue, and we can talk about it. As Sue said, Toronto is kind of unique because it represents a very sizable proportion of the entire population of Canada. If you look between Montreal and Toronto, that's, I don't know, Sue, it might be literally half of our total population. So yes, you get all kinds of entities coming there to do all kinds of things, make a lot of money, businesses, run corporations, and gangs. So yeah, that's a problem. On the West Coast, there is a proliferation of Oriental influence, so much so that some laws have recently been changed. The Chinese were coming to Canada. 300,000 Hong Kong folks are also Canadian citizens. So think about that for a moment. They're dual citizens. And why are they dual citizens? Because they can establish a home in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal or wherever. They can send their kids to school. They can all become Canadian citizens. Then they can go back until they don't feel safe any longer. Then they come. But they come with a lot of wealth. That in itself has caused some issues. And friends of mine who live in Vancouver see entire high-rise apartment buildings sitting empty because they're vacant because they're owned by Hong Kong Canadians. And they keep them there as a relief valve in case they have to move in a hurry. But their kids come and study, and they're driving not Lexus, they're driving Lamborghinis and God only knows what. I mean, the money is extraordinary. I don't drive a Lamborghini, by the way. I drive a Lexus, but there we are. So a long answer to the question. We don't escape anything that you folks put up with. And the final thing I'll say with an enormous amount of pride, but we have a great granddaughter who is Inuit, and she is the most wonderful young lady that she's mixed blood, but that you'd ever want to meet. Wonderful personality, very talented, and we're enormously proud. And like you said earlier, I don't think about it. It's transparent to me. She's just a wonderful young lady, and we're very proud of her. So, anyways, that's kind of Canada. As far as Halifax is concerned, it's a sleepy little place. A lot of immigration going on here now. They're coming here and they're bringing all kinds of entrepreneurial skills and ideas and energy. We have a fairly sizable Black population here. There's every effort in the world to integrate them into our community. But God, it's been going on for 200 years. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Several months ago, I watched a program on Netflix called Drum, and it's about the American Revolution and about George Washington. But the serial ends up in Shelburne, Nova Scotia, and there was a huge land grant for the loyalists to come, blacks and whites, and up they came with free grant land, and the black were in a place called Spruce Town, and Spruce Town was just far enough away from the white town that I guess they could walk into work, but they would go back there to live. And Spruce Town still exists today, and we have several enclaves here, which are 200 years old. And when I came here in 1960, they were so backward. Many of them couldn't read or write. Great progress has been made, but we have nothing to brag about. We have a lot of work to do. So these killings in America against the Orientals, I agree with Sue, we don't see that here so much, but there's a lot of resentment about this COVID-19 and where it came from and why it was allowed to do the damage that it did. A lot of people do point the finger at China.
Yeah. You raised one more story, and that is our in Chula Vista, our favorite sushi restaurant is actually in a Mexican restaurant. And I know this sounds strange, but it's the Baja Oyster and Sushi House. And so, it's fantastic sushi, but it has a Mexican flair to it. And so we asked, this is really good sushi. What's the connection with Mexico? And they said it was very simple. When the internments were coming down the West Coast, the Japanese community in San Diego went to Tijuana. And so that's where they set up, where they were safe, and opened restaurants. And so the one that we go to is actually a plant from Tijuana that came into the United States and opened there. And so it's just you know, it just keeps going. It's just, anyway. So at some point, we're going to have to jump into the book, although I'm very much enjoying our discussion. And Rick or Granville, I don't know if you two wanted to share anything before we keep going.
No, I mean, I have the general feeling that you all have. I grew up in the segregated South, so I didn't experience the violence. It was sort of sub rosa, I guess. But anyway, I mean, I have all of that in mind. I think that's why I've always been very interested in writing about African Americans. And, you know, I have a musical about Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, right, even as we speak. But anyway, it made a big impression on me, the unfairness of the way we treated fellow human beings. And it stuck with me my whole life.
Yeah.
That's all I'd say.
All right. Thank you, Granville. Rick? We ready to head on?
Yes.
You're walking me right toward a deep hole, aren't you? Yes, keep going.
Walking. Is there a rabbit in it? That the rabbit saying, "Come on down."
No, it's that grappling hook.
Oh,
Just a quick comment, and it's part of what I try to do with separation. There's absolutely no doubt of where this coronavirus originated. That's where many viruses originate. And that's not a discriminatory remark. It's not a deliberate attempt on anybody in China or anybody in Asia to let these things loose. I don't buy that argument. They're native to bats particularly, but to other animals also. And because of cultural reasons, perhaps because of whatever else, these got loose. But look at Africa. The same thing has happened with what? HIV. We know where that originated. It moved from an animal to a human in Africa and then spread worldwide. We know where Ebola has been for decades. It pops up and down. It's Africa. So do we discriminate against everybody? Have we ever seen anything in the United States originate and spread to the rest of the world? Well, maybe not in the same sense of these viruses, but certainly things that are probably as damaging in a broader sense. And you look at it and say, I don't, excuse me, I don't have to work very hard at it because it's part of my nature. I make the separation between the origin, for instance, with the pandemic. It is a big deal and it is a tough time for everybody throughout the world. I make a very clear distinction between where it originated. I have no doubt that it originated in China, but I don't see any malice in they didn't do it deliberately. It wasn't a bunch of goof ups doing things. They're very competent in much of their science. But you have to face the fact that that's where it originated. Did somebody, politicians perhaps, bureaucrats, somebody else, foul up, goof up early on and not alerting people to the severity of this and not getting the word out faster? You know, you can make the argument about that. Would that have stopped this entirely? Probably not. But it's very different from saying it's something that the Chinese did deliberately, or Asians in general did deliberately, or Africans in general did deliberately with HIV or Ebola or anything else. And I'm looking at it and saying, that's where the confusion, to me, that's where the confusion comes. We tend to look at it and say, oh, the point of origin was a deliberate attempt on somebody's part to do this. I don't believe that for a second. And I don't care what it is that we're talking about. I try to separate what's happened from the person or the group that did it. And that's just around the pandemic. And you get into relations, race relations and all that sort of stuff. That's a different thing. And it really comes to what we were going to talk about today, if I can be quiet, letting the subconscious rule everything as opposed to the conscious.
yeah.
We have to make, I have to make the decision to separate what a person does from who that person is. And I do that deliberately, and I think I've done it for as long as I can remember. I can't remember a time when I didn't do that. And not immediately assume that there's some kind of ill intent in everything that goes wrong, and it happens to have come from a particular country or grouping of individuals. Now, I can be proven wrong, somebody did that, and oh, by the way, they happen to be Asian or Black or Muslim or Brazilian, or that's beside the point. That's not why they did it, at least in my view. Did their history, did their racial heritage, did their cultural heritage make them do this? Or is it something in the culture that promotes this? And, we have to separate that. I don't think that it's a bunch of, there are people who are bad and deliberately do that. And I think we see that with gangs. We see this with supremacists of whatever type. They know what they're doing, I believe, and they continue to do this. But I think the rest of us need to make that distinction. Well, the rest of us. I need to continue to make that distinction.
And can I add one thing? We must not forget that we, our forebears, introduced smallpox to all our native Indians, Native Americans. So it's just something that will continue to happen until we are able to live together and solve the problems.
Right. And we can't even blame St. Patrick's Day on Ireland, really. I mean,
No. Thank you.
I love when my Mexican friends go, "What is this Cinco de Mayo?" And I'm like, "It's your Independence Day." No, it's not. So, yeah. So anyway, happy St. Patrick's Day. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. And we'll just see where it goes. But anyway, you talking you're making me feel better, so I appreciate it. It's good to get these things out and to chat about it at least. And Rick, I appreciate your I statements, and so we're going to stick with I statements and referring to God as she. At least I'm going to. That's me. So here we go. We're going to jump into our reading for today, and I have yet to figure, there we go. Okay, I'm moving it on my screen. Good. We'll start at the top. So this is, we'll start on page 80, and it's just easier for me to put it up on screen. And if you notice, I've now learned how to highlight, so I can now do that stuff. So I'm very happy about that. So Dr. Alexander writes, the view of human consciousness held by most scientists today is that it is composed of digital information data, that is, of essentially the same kind used by computers. Though some bits of this data seeing a spectacular sunset, hearing a beautiful symphony for the first time, even falling in love, may feel more profound or special to us than the countless other bits of information created and stored in our brains, this is really just an illusion. All bits are, in fact, qualitatively the same. Our brains model outside reality by taking the information that comes in through our senses and transforming it into a rich digital tapestry. But our perceptions are just a model, not of reality itself, an illusion. So I feel like I'm heading back onto what Granville was talking about with taking a particular substance and seeing things differently. That is, it's an illusion. So I almost started the group with the rock band Styx, popular in the 70s and 80s. They had an album called The Grand Illusion. And welcome to the Grand Illusion. So he writes more, to understand how the brain might actually block our access to knowledge of the higher worlds, we need to accept, at least hypothetically and for the moment, that the brain itself doesn't produce consciousness. So that is fascinating to me. So just for hypothetically, if our brain is not producing consciousness, what is it and where does it come from? There were some writers in the 13th and 14th century, we don't have enough time to jump into them today, that they believed consciousness was here, 1.5 feet above your head. and that your consciousness was here, your angels were here, if you can see that, and that if you've ever met somebody and you started talking and you felt as if you knew them, it's because your angel and their angels are friends, and that they share your consciousness and your thoughts. And so when you meet somebody, you're like, oh, our angels are friends. And so when we die, our consciousness is up here so that the body itself can die. But consciousness is not contained here, it's contained here. This is way before we understood about slave computers and how we can have cameras that see and do all this stuff remotely. And I think these folks would be fascinated by, again, the Mars rover that's up there, and how we can have visuals from way far away. You see here, but consciousness. That what if it's held outside of our own body? So Rick, I don't see you sitting on your hands yet, but at some point we might jump in. So he goes on to say that from a more focused perspective, and I now believe the universe is nothing if not purposeful, which I appreciate. It's nice to know there's a purpose out there. That's good. Anyway, so from a more purpose-focused perspective, making the right decisions through our free will in the face of the evil and injustice on Earth would mean far less if we remembered while here the full beauty and brilliance of what awaits us. So if we could capture the joy and the beauty and the love that is waiting for us, that these things that we do on Earth would mean far less. And so the idea of this is that maybe we are being blocked so that we more participate in making decisions here. It's a fascinating concept. So some of you look like you're interested, so I didn't want to, before I keep going.
Is it us that are we actually blocking that, or is it coming from somewhere else? Are we, as we age, putting in more filters for that sort of thing? Or putting roadblocks to a higher level of thought? Some of it's a little scary, if you actually have tuned in and you think, oh dear, maybe I better get back to reality. So I'm wondering whether it's something we do to ourselves or whether it's a thing of aging or what. I don't know. And Granville, you had the experience with the drugs, and that could have wiped out your conscious memory, actually, and made you more apt to see other things that, the filters were gone, basically.
Right. But I guess the filters, well, we all have them according to this book, I suppose, or maybe our own common knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are they, and it's also, I don't know, are all the filters the same in all people, or no? There must be a huge variety of filters, obviously.
True.
Very true. Right. That's a good point.
David, could I go back to something we mentioned in our last lesson?
Sure.
Talking about, well, it's when St. Augustine, baptizing children.
Mm-hmm.
They have a better perception about God, and I think also heaven.
Yeah.
If you think when you were a child, wasn't heaven a beautiful place? And then as we grow on in life, our theories and minds change. So I'll leave it there. It's harder to work at becoming a more godly person, put it that way. Our egos go off into other directions.
Right. That the distance between being a godly person when you're young, like when you're 5 or 2, then now, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Well, there was something in this argument in the book that he just wrote that made trouble. I mean, was he saying if we understood how wonderful everything is going to be in the higher worlds when we get there, it would give us a different perspective on all, it sounded like, the problems of the earth. And I guess I was thinking, well, I don't want to be less upset about what just happened in Atlanta.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like I'm down here in this Amish Mennonite community in Sarasota. In terms of the COVID, their attitude is basically, well, you know, if God's going to take me when he is going to, you know, I'm not going to be bothered with it. You know, I guess they're focused on higher things, as it were, or not at all. But anyway, that troubled me a little bit about that passage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's let me bring it back up. It's I thought this was really good to discuss. Okay, so let me rewind a bit. We'll go up here. So if he starts here where it says, there is, from the earthly perspective, a very definite advantage to this, as in to being able to block. Just as our brains work hard every moment of our waking lives to filter out the barrage of sensory information coming from us, from our physical surroundings, selecting the material we actually need in order to survive, so it is that forgetting our trans-earthly identities also allows us to be here and now far more effectively. Just as most ordinary life holds too much information for us to take in all at once and still get anything done, being excessively conscious of the worlds beyond the here and now would slow down our progress even more. If we knew too much of the spiritual realm now, then navigating our lives on earth would be an even greater challenge than it already is. That's not to say we shouldn't be conscious of the worlds beyond now, only that we're extra conscious of their grandeur and immensity. They can prevent action while still on earth. And so from a more purpose-focused perspective, making the right decisions through our free will in the face of evil and injustice on earth, we mean far less if we remembered while here the full beauty and brilliance of what awaits us. I don't like the death penalty for a variety of reasons. But if I were to open my brain the way that Paul did, where he could see heaven, I might change my opinion on the death penalty. I might say, well, you know, something good's waiting that person. So, you know, that might be way too simplistic. But what about people just deciding to walk off a bridge because they know what's waiting for them is better than what's here? So, but I think, and Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what he's talking about is what we had talked about, and that is the number of bits that our brain can process. The random access memory that our computers have can only process so much. There's only so many logs that can transfer from one area to another. And that the way that our brains are wired, we can't take all of that information in at once, and it would disrupt. Is that a good way of, do you agree with that, I guess is what I'm saying?
Well, it's not whether I agree or not. It is appropriate up to a point. We take in a great deal more information than goes to our conscious, to the conscious parts of our brain, what he's talking about with the neocortex. Uh-huh. That doesn't mean that that information simply stops. And there are interesting studies. I'm sorry, I got to get off this. This is the problem of the hard problem versus the easy problem with consciousness. So yesterday, just by luck, I was reading about these subconscious kinds of activities and well done, well replicated experiments in the laboratory showing that if you give a visual stimulus of either a word or an image that has negative connotations and do it so fast that the subject can't see it, they don't know that it's there consciously, you can affect the decisions that they make when you ask them questions, you ask them to describe things subsequent to it. So obviously the information came in, it went someplace, and it has, based on these experiments, an outcome that was different than had you not shown these. And they did it both with positive words, positive images, negative images. They did them back and forth. They did them in the same people. They did them over and over and over again. Then they did them over time, and they found the same sort of thing. The person had no understanding whatsoever that they had been shown this word that had negative or bad connotations to it, or this image. And yet their responses were tilted in that direction. If it was a bad image or a bad word or a negative sort of thing, their response was tilted toward the negative. If it was more positive, it was tilted more toward the positive. It was shifting back and forth. It wasn't completely obliterating anything. But it said to these researchers, and I have to take their word for it, that that information, while we never become aware of it, actually does influence what we do, what we say, how we see, how we react. And that's where I come back, for me, to putting my conscious part to try and separate those where I see them, where I recognize that they're there. When I look at an image and it looks bad, or it looks, a skin color is not what I'm used to, the conscious part of me kicks in and says, so what? Differences are wonderful. Let's celebrate the differences. It doesn't mean bad. It doesn't mean negative. Knowing full well that someplace down deep inside, it's probably sending a message up to tip it toward the bad, the negative type of thing. Is that helpful? I don't know whether that's helpful. It's just me getting down this darn hole you keep leading me to.
Well, I started to feel the gravity of that pull of the hole itself. So, so are you talking about subliminal? I mean, I don't mean to simplify the study, but
That's one way to look at it. Yes, these were images. Let me stay with the images. The words are a little harder to follow. The images were flashed so quickly that the person had, excuse me, no idea that they were there. There was no reaction anyplace in the visual system, in the neocortex, the higher centers of the brain. But it did influence when they were shown another picture, how they reacted to that. And if they were shown something that was negative, they reacted more negatively to it. If they were shown something positive, they reacted more positively.
Were they shown these multiple times?
They were shown it once.
Once, okay.
So it was one image that was projected on a computer screen before the image they were asked to describe, but so fast that they couldn't process it consciously. Over and over and over again, it tilted the response toward whichever way the initial image was going, positive or negative.
wow.
Interesting.
And then it would reverse. They would take the same people and reverse it so that they would show them where they'd been showing them negative things or bad things or that kind of stuff. They'd show them the good, and it would tip the other way. So it wasn't something that was innate to the person.
That's interesting.
So we're receiving these images constantly, Rick, all the time, that are influencing us in ways that we don't consciously understand.
That's what the whole gist of this was, that of all the information that comes in, only some of it gets up to our higher conscious centers, the neocortex, the part that gives us. I'm still completely baffled. I'm worse than I was before I started this reading about where consciousness originates. Because
Well, is there not?
It originates outside the body, but how do you do that? But anyhow, yes, we're getting all this information. We don't actively, consciously, deliberately process it. It's not something that's shooting straight through into the higher centers up here. It's staying way down deep inside, but influencing what goes up higher.
Mm-hmm.
So is he not explaining that his physical consciousness through his viral infection and death, as we suppose, took him into a spiritual consciousness? I mean, there's a complete separation. I mean, I have a feeling this is what he's trying to explain to us, that he had this experience. What we experience in this world is different from what he experienced, because he went out of this world into another, spiritual consciousness.
Right.
Is that something we can accept? That's what we're discussing, right?
Yeah, let me jump in for one more thing that he wrote. And this is on page 82 towards the bottom. that he's saying this, but conveying knowledge is now rather like being a chimpanzee, becoming human for a single day to experience all of the wonders, in page 83, all of the wonders of human knowledge, and then returning to one's chimp friends and trying to tell them what it was like knowing several different Romance languages, the calculus, and the immense scale of the universe. To which I'd argue, you can't do that in a day. So I barely know English. How can you anyway? But the idea of having this other knowledge and then trying to convey it might be a reason why it's being blocked. And so, Rick, with the idea of understanding less about consciousness now than you did before the book, is a little bit like studying dark matter, where we know that matter has mass, mass has gravity, and yet there's something that has no matter or mass that has gravity. So do we have gravity wrong? Do we have, how can that work? And so we have to rethink gravity and matter at the same time. And so to understand consciousness, by understanding less about it, we might be getting closer to it. Maybe that. Anyway, so then just so we can finish off our reading for today. So he's, and this brings us back to, the evil that we saw in Atlanta. I saw the earth as a pale blue dot in the immense blackness of physical space. I could see that the earth was a place where good and evil mixed, and that this constituted one of its unique features. Even on earth, there is much more good than evil, but earth is a place where evil is allowed to gain influence in a way that would be entirely impossible at higher levels of existence. So the reason why I bring this part up is that that by having a message that somebody can't read, but it affects their influence for good or bad, it's interesting that evil is allowed to gain influence in a way that would be entirely impossible at higher levels of existence. So that evil could occasionally have the upper hand was known and allowed by the Creator as a necessary consequence of giving the gift of free will to beings like us. The very fabric of the alternate dimension is love and acceptance. And anything that does not have these qualities appears immediately and obviously out of place there. But free will comes at the cost of a loss or falling away from this love and acceptance. We are free, but we are free beings hemmed all around by an environment conspiring to make us feel that we are not free. Free will is of central importance for our function in the earthly realm, a function that we will all one day discover serves the much higher role of allowing our ascendance in the timeless alternate dimension. Our life down here may seem insignificant, for it is minute in relation to the other lives and other worlds that are also crowd the invisible and visible universes, but it is also hugely important. For our role here is to grow toward the divine, and that growth is closely watched by the beings in the worlds above and the souls and lucent orbs. So, I know that didn't answer anything. That may have just brought up more questions, but
Yes.
so the fabric of the alternate dimension is love and acceptance. And anything that does not have love or acceptance is immediately out of place and obvious, but it's not as obvious here. But in order to have free will, we have to have that.
We have, excuse me, we have to have a basis for comparison, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything is, excuse me, is done by comparing what we know or what we think we know to what is out there and looking at any discrepancy and saying, can I explain that discrepancy?
Right.
If we don't know up, how do we know down?
Yeah, so to play music, you have to understand silence. You have to have both. It's interesting. So in the fabric that he's talking about, the alternate dimension of love and acceptance, that the out of place is things that are not love and acceptance. And so that would be the opposing or the opposite or the way that you would compare.
Pretty bird.
Yeah. Maybe we should just listen to the bird for a while and think about St. Francis.
That would be lovely.
I think that would be lovely.
That's right. He's giving us a message.
Right. Nice. I want to see. I have some other stuff, but we'll. Yeah, all right. So to wrap it up, he asked the question: how do we get close? And this is on page. I don't have that final page because I don't think it's this one. So at the end of 84. Okay. How do we get closer to this genuine spiritual self? By manifesting love and compassion. Why? Because love and compassion are far more than the abstractions many of us believe them to be. They are real, they are concrete, and they make up the very fabric of the spiritual realm. In order to return to that realm, we must again become like that realm, even while we're stuck in and plodding through this one. And so the things that Granville saw, wait, let me bring him back in. There we go. Yep. Let me make sure he's logged in. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, sorry, my phone died. I don't have any.
All right. So by manifesting love and compassion is far more real, and it's concrete, and it makes up the realm of the spiritual. So the things that you saw growing up in divided South made you compassionate and made you interested in learning more about other people's experience. And I would say that's love and compassion. Had you not been raised in that realm, well, okay, we can't start playing what if, right? That's going to take us way far off the mark. But it's interesting to think, to me, it's interesting to think that we get closer to the genuine spiritual self by manifesting love and compassion. And that is one of the central focuses of Jesus and his message to us, is to show love as we have been loved, to forgive as we have been forgiven, and to care for those in need. It all centers around love and compassion. And for Jesus, that was real. Love and compassion are concrete, and they made up the very fabric of who he is. And that the famous image of the needle trying to go through, the camel trying to go through the eye of a needle, by unpacking and getting rid of all that stuff, that we can get down to the fabric of the realm that we are called to occupy and to exhibit on this earth. So with that,
I have I'm sorry, I can't resist asking a question. He says, in order to return to that realm, that says to me, we've already been there.
Yeah.
And now we're coming into this and we're going back.
Reincarnation.
Hey, all right. If
Sorry.
you're playing Proof of Heaven bingo, you just can now put your card down for reincarnation. So now we can cover that up.
I'm sorry, I had to.
Right. So the thought, the Augustinian belief that children know more about God than we do. You know, the idea that it's to return to that. Jesus calling us to become like children. You cannot enter the kingdom of God unless you become like one of these, pointing to the kids. That there's some returning back to the way things were when we were young or born or any of that. And again, I don't want to stumble into ageism here. So getting back to that we had a greater sense of it at one point. You know, one of the LDS Latter-day Saints, one of the Mormon thoughts is that that babies are spirits up in heaven, and that they come down to occupy the the soul comes down to the earth. And so, and then when we die, we return. So it's this interesting, I'm not saying that that's what it is, but it's, and I don't think that Dr. Alexander would identify as being LDS, but it's an interesting idea.
Mhm.
Rick, did that help at all?
Way back.
I just, I have trouble with the idea that, you know, we've been there, we're now on Earth, we're shielded from the former reality, from the love, the acceptance, all of that. We're put here to go through a life where we move more and more distant from that. That's not ageism, that to me is a reality.
Okay, okay.
And you look at it and say, and then we'll go back. And what was the purpose? Not that everything necessarily has to have a purpose, it's obvious to me or to any individual, but looking at it and saying, that just doesn't work very well for me. It's much easier for me to accept that there are all these parallel universes and I move sideways from one to another. And I'm able, you know, at one time I was in a different one and now I'm in this one and I'll move out of this one into another one. There's an eternalness to those kinds of universes and moving between and among them. This coming out of the realm, going back into the realm presents me with some difficulty, and not because we move further away from it as we become older. I think we allow more of the I don't know whether I want to say mundane or the trivial to get in the way of other issues.
Right.
Does that, I don't know. It's not making sense to me, so I'm doubting it's making sense to anybody else.
So I have a visual in my head that might wrap all this up, and it has to do with Larry Ashley. So Larry knows what it's like to be weightless, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Right. It's not always the goal of every pilot to feel that, but you've been in some times where you have had your hindquarters smashed down into the bottom of your pilot seat, and other times where you have floated above. Some might indicate that that's two different realms. The realm of where you're floating without gravity or traveling with gravity, I don't know what the right, and then you feel the hardness of your seat as you come down, right? That what if that's just a universe, or the sense that when we die, we are no longer affected by that type of gravity. And so the sense of weightlessness is, which I think I find uncomfortable. Some pilots actually enjoy it. Does your cognitive behavior when you're weightless, Larry, does it change the way that one operates a plane?
My occurrence was when I became weightless, I had lost control and was inverted in a helicopter with a load of people.
Oh my gosh.
And so my consciousness was one of stark terror and, oh my God, how can I get my hands on the controls again? Because I was upside down, weightless, and in my harness, unable to do anything. Then when we recovered, the G forces were delivered by the good Lord and not Larry Ashley until I was able to get to the controls. So that was kind of a normal experience. Now, translate to I'm flying an F-18 and I'm pulling G. When I'm pulling extreme G, and not being really an experienced fighter pilot, I struggle a bit because it's hard physiologically on the body. Rick could explain all that to you. But when I'm pulling G, I'm very discomforted. It's painful for me. but in terms of my thought processes, I'm able to conduct myself in a disciplined, thoughtful way. In a high performance aircraft, I did, for instance, attempted an outside loop and became weightless. Again, I'm back at that fear again, that, oh my God, what am I doing to myself? So the two are quite distinct. That's evading your question, David. I'm sorry, I can't translate that into spiritual terms, but that was my own personal experience, and it made me a very thankful person. The Newfoundland experience, and that's why I wrote the paper on angels.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I didn't realize you had other people in the helicopter with you. So
I had 7 Newfoundland firefighters and my crewmen. The Newfoundland firefighters all thought it was a normal trip.
They're all Irish.
they're all Irish.
Oh dear.
Man, wow. I knew some naval aviators, retired F-18 folks that had constant hip problems, and it's because their hip bones would get separated so often by the G-force that that by the time they were 70 years old, 68, that their hips just hurt. It's not a natural thing to do.
It brings up another point I might make, and that is that I am so old that it was during my period running the Air Force up here that we opened up the combat trades to women, and we opened up combat flying operations to women. We'd already done helicopters and so on. And there was every excuse known to man why women couldn't fly high performance aircraft. Of course, when that barrier was broken, it turned out that these young women were physiologically better designed to fly high performance aircraft. Once we got the equipment sorted out a little bit for them, G suits and flying suits and poopy suits and all these kinds of things, that they physiologically could handle a fighter aircraft under high G and the rapid onset of G better than men. So we had no instances of what you described, David, amongst the new population of women fighter pilots. Wow. They took to it like I took to helicopters. It's a lot safer, I thought. But anyways, that's a little story about women in non-traditional trades. That's how we called it up here, non-traditional trades. And frequently it turned out they make pretty darn good soldiers and pretty darn good submariners and fighter pilots, and don't disbelieve any of that.
Nice. That is awesome. Well, I think that's a good way to end. Yes, Granville.
The irony of this, as Rick pointed out, is that we from the moment of birth, we move farther and farther away from love and acceptance, and yet we are supposedly moving more and more towards the divine when we will be, knowing love and acceptance. It's like we're programmed to go away from it in order to get to it.
Mm.
All right. Can I ask you one question, David, too? Because when it changed in my book when you started saying one of the biggest mistakes people make. Yes, God is behind the numbers, perfection of the universe that science measures and struggles to understand. But again, paradoxically, Om is human as well, even more human than you and I. He understands and sympathizes with our human situation more profoundly and personally than we can ever imagine. Because one forgets, Om knows what we have forgotten and understands the terrible burden it is to live with amnesia of the divine for even a moment.
Yes. Yep. Amnesia of the divine.
But Om, can you explain? Om is the word, the technical word he gives for that person like God. Mm-hmm. And it's just what Granville was saying, we have forgotten whether it's convenient or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a terrible burden, though we don't consider it that way. It's easier not to work hard at being what God would like us to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure why my handout doesn't have that part. I have the book open to 86 and it's there.
Yeah.
I'm reading it. So yeah, it's
So mine, I've got a different page than everyone else, I guess.
that's
It goes
interesting.
science measures and struggles to understand.
Right, right. So okay, first
I
for
found that interesting, confusing though.
right. For what the author's calling the name for God is that it's the sound, it's a vibration. That's what Om is, right? It's
Yoga, right.
it's beyond naming, and the reason why in Hebrew scripture we don't actually know what God's name is. They removed all the vowels out. It's because if you can name something, then you can own it, and obviously nobody's going to own God. And so the fact that his name would be a vibration is awesome. And a little bit like tuning jet engines is that you hear the vibration, and that's how you can set them, as opposed to instruments, right? It's everything has a vibration, everything is moving and vibrating, and God is Om is the center of all of that. And so as a wavelength goes, Rick can be at the top and Larry can be at the bottom, or is it at each top or bottom, is it a different universe as we switch? We certainly know that with gravity. So it's pretty fascinating. But Granville, I like what you're saying, that the spiritual amnesia that we have as we are getting near the end of our earthly life, we should be drawing closer to it, but we seem to have forgotten even more than what we began with. And so or we have forgotten what we began with, not even more than what we've, it's a very good insight. So I'm glad that we at least are attempting it now.
Yeah. With this book, we're making a small effort.
Right. Okay, so the last thought is that I say this to people who are grieving, who have had a spouse who just recently passed away. I tell them that if you are feeling numb, if you're not feeling numb, you will. And if you are feeling numb, here's the deal. Numb is a feeling, but numb allows you to do all of the legwork, all the paperwork, everything that revolves around the death of a loved one, so that you can functionally do that stuff. And that once all of that stuff's done, once the memorial service is completed, all that stuff, then numb goes away, and then grief just comes flooding in again. And that numb is a gift in the sense that allows us to be able to operate. And I have been putting that perspective onto what he's saying, as far as we are maybe numb to the spiritual realm so that we can do the legwork of all the stuff. But at some point, and maybe we have the ability to move numb out of the way and to allow the rest to come in. So that's my final thought of the day. I didn't think I would share that today, but but yeah. So I just looked at the clock and noticed that we have gone over time. So anyway, it feels like an hour earlier for some odd reason. So anyway, I appreciate you you tuning in today, and for sharing, and for all of our experiences. Thank you. Next week is our I don't know how in the world we're going to wrap this up, but we're going to give it a shot. So again, thank you all, and may God bless you and watch over you, and may God continue to help those who are feeling numb and those who are feeling grief. God bless and take care. Amen, and a silent hallelujah. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, David. Bye, everyone.
Bye.